President Brown's going to be about 5 minutes late, so I'm promising to wait for him. So we're hoping for about 1:05.
Johnson here. Can you hear me in the Bollinger room?
Vice President Johnson, we hear you fine. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner.
We are waiting for President Brown. So we did not start at 1. We're hoping to start at 1:05. Want to remind the folks online that we're waiting for President Brown and Commissioner O'Donnell. I'm told they're almost here. We apologize for not starting at 1 sharp. Thank you. This hearing is called to order. Today is Tuesday, August 16th, 2022, and the time is 1:06 p.m. This is the time and place set for the public hearing on the proposed adoption of new rules 1 through 6 and the repeal of ARM 38-52001 through 38-52012, ARM 38-5.2016, ARM 38.5.8201 through 38.5.8204, ARM 38.8209 through 38.5.8213, ARM 38.5.8218 through 38.5.8221, ARM 38.5.8225 through 38.5.8227, ARM 38.5.8229. Regarding resource planning, I am Commissioner Randy Pinocci, and I've been delegated the responsibility to preside over this hearing by the Montana Public Service Commission. I do have all 5 commissioners present, 1 via Zoom, Brad Johnson. Montana law requires a presiding officer at a rulemaking hearing to read the following notice of functions and administrative rule review committee. Administrative rule review is a function of intern committees and the Environmental Quality Council, EQC. The intern committees and the EQC have administrative rule review, program evaluation, monitoring functions for the following executive branch agencies and the entities attached to the agencies for administrative purposes. Economic Affairs Intern Committee, Department of Agriculture, Department of Commerce, Department of Labor and Industry, Department of Livestock, Office of the State Auditor, Insurance Commissioner, Office of Economic Development. Education and Local Government Intern Committee, State Board of Education, Board of Public Education, Board of Regents and Higher Education, and Office of Public Instruction. Children, Families, Health and Human Services Intern Committee, the Department of Public Health and Human Services. Law and Justice Intern Committee, Department of Corrections and Department of Justice. Energy and Telecommunications Intern Committee, Department of Public Service Regulation. Revenue and Transportation Intern Committee, Department of Revenue, Department of Transportation. State Administration and Veterans Affairs Intern Committee, Department of Administration, Department of Military Affairs, and Office of Secretary of State. Environmental Quality Council, Department of Environmental Quality, Department of Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, and Department of Natural Resources and Conservation. Water Policy Intern Committee, where the primary concern is quality or quantity of water. Department of Environmental Quality, Department of Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, and Department of Natural Resources and Conservation. These intern committees and the EQC have the authority to make recommendations to an agency regarding adoption, amendment, or repeal of rule, or request that an agency prepare a statement of the estimated economic impact of a proposal. They also may poll the members of the legislature to determine if a proposed rule is consistent with the intent of the legislature, or during a legislative session include a bill repealing a rule, or directing an agency to adopt or amend a rule, or a joint resolution recommending that the agency adopt, amend, or repeal a rule. The intern committee and the EQC welcome comments and invite members of the public to appear before them or send written statements in order to bring their attention to any difficulties with the existing and proposed rules. The mailing address is P.O. Box 201-706, Helena, Montana 59620-1706. I'll move to the proceeding. The notice of public hearing on the proposed rule changes was published on July 22nd, 2022 in the Montana Administrative Register at MAR notice number 38-5-256. A copy of the notice can be found on the Secretary of State's website at http://somt.gov/ARM/register. The rulemaking proceeding concerns the Commission's integrated resource planning rules, which are being proposed in response to House Bill 597 from the 2019 legislative session of the Montana Legislature. House Bill 597 enacted changes to the utility long-term planning process and added requirements for competitive procurement processes for new electric resources to implement these changes. The agency proposes several new rules that draw concepts from its existing rules found at ARM Title 38, Chapter 5, Subchapters 20 and 82, and an update the resource planning process to reflect the legislator's directive to the agency. These rules replace in whole or part existing resource planning rules, ARM Title 38, Chapter 5, Subchapters 20 and 82. Paragraph 1, the notice indicates that the purpose of this hearing is to consider the proposed adoption and repeal of the stated rules. Paragraph 2 of the notice advises the public the department will make reasonable accommodations for persons with disabilities so the persons can participate in the rulemaking process. Paragraph 3 sets forth the text of the proposed new rules and justification for adoption. Paragraph 4 lists the rules to be repealed and justification for the repeal. Paragraph 5 indicates that the interested persons may present their data, views, or arguments either orally or in writing at this hearing or after this hearing to the Commission. Paragraph 6 notes that the Montana Consumer Council is available to represent the interest of the consuming public. Paragraph 7 describes the process for joining the Commission's interested persons list for administrative rulemaking. Paragraph 8 states the department has determined the purpose rule will not significantly or directly impact small businesses. Paragraph 9 notes that a copy of the proposed notice is available on the Secretary of State's website. Paragraph 10 concludes that the bill sponsor contact requirements of state law do not apply to rulemaking and the primary bill sponsor who was contacted. The purpose of this hearing is to receive public comment regarding the proposed rule changes. In addition to the hearing, written comments regarding the proposed rule changes may be submitted to the Commission. All written comments must be submitted to the Commission no later than 5 p.m. on August 22nd, 2022, following the close of the public comment period. The Commission will summarize and respond to any comments received. The summarized comments and the Commission's responses will be published in the Montana Administrative Register as part of the rulemaking process. Are there any proponents to the proposed rulemaking?
Mr. Chairman, before we proceed, just a point of order, a little correction. On paragraph 10, I believe you just had a typo. Paragraph 10 concludes that the bill sponsor contact requirements of state law do apply to this rulemaking. And I think you said do not. So that was just a little typo there. They do apply.
Okay, all right. My attorney agrees, so, all right. Any proponents? Seeing none. Are there any? Oh, there is a proponent. Okay.
Sorry, I wasn't quite quick enough there. Good afternoon. My name is Shannon Heim. I'm the Director of Regulatory Counsel for Northwestern Energy. With me today is Cindy Fang, Director of Regulatory Affairs, and Steve Schmidt, our Manager of Energy Supply Planning. Effective long-term supply planning is critical to ensuring Northwestern's customers have consistent access to a reliable power supply. The need to accurately and effectively plan is at the heart of our business. It is no exaggeration to say that this is the most momentous rulemaking the Commission has undertaken in years. I think this is the third or fourth time I've actually said that sentence to you because we have been in this process for a very long time. We're still studying the proposed rules that the Commission put out, but we appreciate the work that has gone into their development. There's been a lot of behind the scenes work and workshopping with all of the stakeholders and Commission staff to get us to where we are today, which we think, as painful as the sausage making may be, is a good place. Meaningful oversight represents a critical component of the Commission's regulatory work related to energy utilities. The rules currently under consideration by the Commission reflect an enhanced understanding that was developed through constructive conversations between stakeholders and the Commission staff. Northwestern will provide more detailed comments in its written submission on August 22nd, but I'd like to highlight just a couple of issues. First, new Rule 6.3 states, quote, when using a third-party administrator in the competitive solicitation process, a utility should A, obtain input from its advisory committee and stakeholders regarding the appropriate use and selection of a third-party administrator, including whether a third-party administrator should be selected through a competitive process, end quote. Northwestern values the input of its advisory committee and our stakeholders, but the Commission should be cautious about setting any expectation that a competitive solicitation should be used to select a third-party administrator. The third-party administrator is a partner to the utility and to run the RFP and evaluate resources. The administrator must have a substantial amount of knowledge about the utility's resource portfolio to effectively do its work. A pre-existing relationship with the administrator is crucial for the work to be done during the RFP process and the subsequent rate review. A competitive solicitation will not necessarily yield the attributes most valuable to the utility to support its work. Northwestern doesn't dismiss the value of the input of its advisory committee or categorically dismiss a competitive solicitation generally, but there will rarely, if ever, be a fit. The solicitation process will rarely, if ever, be a fit to select the third-party administrator. It's analogous to choosing a caregiver for your child or an elderly parent. The evaluation of skills, experience, and trust just often don't fit into a competitive solicitation. Second, I'd like to highlight the key difference between the third-party administrator and the independent monitor. In our conversations, sometimes the roles of those two very different people have gotten conflated. So we just wanted to identify where we think the difference really lies. Northwestern strongly urges the Consumer Council, as provided in the rules, to utilize the independent monitor provided for within the rules as drafted. The independent monitor provides a double check on the work done by the utility and the administrator. It is important that all stakeholders understand the difference between those functions so that we don't get them conflated. Thank you again for your time. Northwestern looks forward to a continuing dialogue with the Commission, the stakeholders here today, and our customers as we prepare our integrated resource plan for filing later this year.
Thank you. Any other proponents? Make sure the light is illuminated and you state your name and address for the record. Thank you.
Chairman, Commissioners, Mike Green from Crowley Fleck on behalf of Montana Dakota Utilities. And we, like Northwestern Energy, are continuing to work our way through these proposals. I believe they are a substantial improvement over some drafts that were circulated previously, which were a wholesale revision of the planning process. And we think this gets back into the realm of kind of what was intended. I will make a comment, Mr. Chairman, for future rulemaking. I would suggest that incremental changes and starting with existing rules and modifying them rather than wholesale drafting maybe a more appropriate way to do this, and also starting with some workshopping on the front end. I think that staff who are frankly no longer with the commission started off this process with a very robust set of rules, which got lots and lots of people excited and or alternatively upset, and started this process down a really rocky path that didn't necessarily have to be walked. And I would refer you to House Bill 597, which I think is really a template for how the rulemaking could have been done, which was to go in and make incremental changes where important to existing rule provisions. So the background of this was that in the early 1990s, a huge stakeholder group got together and worked with this commission and its staff to build a very robust integrated resource planning rule regime, which has served the state very, very well. Then in the late 90s, with deregulation, a new set of rules was created for the default supply, which then applied to Northwestern Energy and its planning process. House Bill 597 was really the legislature's effort to combine those back and have one integrated resource planning process for all of the utilities that serve the state of Montana. But if you look at that, the legislative intent was to go back and make tweaks to those old rules. So it went in and changed, House Bill 597 went in and made changes to the old resource planning rules, those historical rules drafted in the early 1990s. And so I think that we're back to very close to where we are, but just in the interest of transparency, this has been a difficult process because it's not entirely clear what the commission has intended to change and what is new. And so I would just say what would be helpful in this process is in its adoption, if the commission could be clear about what it intends to change through these new rules and what it intends to retain, what was good about the historical process that it wants to retain. Because as I look through these rules, it's very difficult for me to tell what it intends to change. As they exist today, we will have some suggestions and some potential additional comments, but on the whole, we think this is a good process, a substantial improvement over some of those earlier drafts. And we appreciate your time and attention to this matter and look forward to further clarification as the process goes.
Thank you for that. Any more proponents? Any more proponents? Okay, we'll start with the opponents. We'll start with the ones in the room. Please make sure the light's illuminated. You state your name and address. And those that are online, we'll start with you after the opponents in the room are finished. I'd like to go first.
All right. Mr. Chair, Mr. President, Commissioners, my name is Diego Rivas. I'm a Senior Policy Associate with the Northwest Energy Coalition. And I am appearing here today on behalf of the coalition, as well as two of its members, NRDC and Human Resources Council District 11. I want to first thank you for the opportunity to comment today on the proposed rule for integrated resource planning. As you know, and has been talked about, this has been a long process since the passage of HB 597 in 2019. And it's been a process, as previously pointed out, filled with twists and turns and multiple rounds of draft rules. We also will be providing more substantive written comments, but to sum up our position, we believe the proposed rule could and indeed should be stronger. And we are disappointed with the outcome of the process leading up to the current proposed rule. While the proposed rule provides a small step forward in the requirements for utility planning, unlike previous more comprehensive draft rules, the proposed rule falls short of what is needed to ensure that utilities and their customers are not saddled with increased costs and increased risks. While HB 597 recognized the need for updated planning rules, and that's the reason we are here today, the Commission is no doubt aware of its ability to update planning rules of its own volition. Even outside of HB 597, the Commission already had broad authority under 69.3.103 to prescribe rules of procedure and to do all things necessary and convenient in the exercise of its powers. Simply put, the Commission could have, like currently underway with the intervention rules, could have initiated a process to update planning rules even absent HB 597, which means that though HB 597 necessitated a rulemaking process, the commission is not bound solely by those provisions within that legislation. And by limiting the rule to specifics within HB 597, the commission is missing an opportunity to fully modernize the planning process to meet the needs of today's electric system. Before moving forward, I think it's important to recognize some history. Mr. Green took you back to the 90s. I'll one up and go back to the 80s, which is when the development of generally the integrated resource plan was developed. And that was a result of a few key factors. Increased load growth as electricity became used for more and more products, inflation creating price pressures. And in response to those first two, utilities sank millions of dollars into generation that ended up not being needed. Coupled with environmental concerns, the increased rates and little to no benefit for customers, regulators sought to rein in utilities build first, ask questions later mentality, as utilities attempted to own all the generation needed to serve load within their particular service territory. Here in Montana, deregulation placed another chapter in the IRP storybook. Recall that Northwestern Energy entered Montana by purchasing solely the transmission and distribution assets of the former Montana Power Company. Later, under re-regulation, Northwestern was allowed and perhaps even encouraged to acquire resources. Legislation thereabouts established the default supply planning. And though Northwestern has posited that the RPP or resource procurement plan has been essentially the same as an IRP, the mindset within that planning process has been and continues to be simply what resources do we need to acquire to meet future load. The point here is that the planning rules have been developed over time by responding to a specific set of circumstances. Today, the circumstances have changed once again. The electric system is much more dynamic than ever. Gone is the ability to pick a singular stationary resource to meet energy needs. Now, instead, utilities are engaged in capacity planning, have distributed generation on the grid, which they must respond to. They contain the ability to have both flexible supply and flexible demand through smart meters, appliances, curtailing load through voluntary demand response programs, and encouraging certain usage patterns through newly developed rate designs. Yet the proposed rules do not rise to the occasion and continue to enable, through vagaries and lack of specificity about what is required, continue to enable very basic planning to the detriment of customers. Put another way, the proposed rules does not change the paradigm that utility planning exists for the sole purpose of procuring additional resources. While many commenters have and will address the RFP process, comments that we largely support, it's important to keep in mind that the RFP is the culmination of the IRP. What happens before the drafting of the RFP is similarly important. Again, much of the shortcoming in the proposed rules as we see it arises due to a lack of specificity and pervasive vagueness. Whereas the initial draft rule that received 2 rounds of excellent public comment was detailed and thorough, the proposed rule leaves too many options for the utility to exploit and failed to meet the planning needs of today and plan for the dynamic electric system that we have. I'll conclude by noting that Northwestern Energy just filed a rate case asking for a very substantial rate increase. If that doesn't signal the amount of that increase doesn't signal that the paradigm that we have currently is broken, then I'm not sure what does. The proposed rule continues this broken paradigm. Again, we will be providing more specific and substantive suggestions in written comments. The Northwest Energy Coalition, NRDC, and Human Resources Council District 11 hope that you will continue to improve the proposed rule to ensure that utilities are properly planning for the conditions of today and tomorrow, not yesterday, in an effort to reduce cost and reduce risk to customers. Thank you.
Thank you. Next opponent, please. Yes, make sure the light's illuminated, please.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Austin Rushoff with the law firm of Holland and Hart. I'm here today on behalf of the Montana Large Customer Group. The Large Customer Group is an informal coalition of large industrial energy consumers. They take service from Northwestern Energy, some as choice customers, some as bundled service customers. But all aspects of utilities, cost of service, and resource planning have an impact on our clients' rates. That's why I'm here today. I come before you as a proponent of the rule, but I do think the rule, as it's transformed through the process, has improved upon some of the initial proposals. That said, I think the rule could go further, and there's additional language that the commission could include in the rule to fully protect ratepayer interests. As many commenters have said, we do plan to submit more substantive comments and some red line format proposing changes, but I just wanted to provide some initial general thoughts at this point. As I mentioned, the large customer group has participated in this proceeding. We've submitted a few rounds of comments, and we are happy to see that some of our prior comments and suggestions were incorporated into the latest draft of rules, specifically around increasing transparency and making it more clear in the rules that the utility needs to consider stakeholder input, their advisory group, things of that nature, and describe in the resource planning process how they incorporated that feedback. That said, I will touch on a few things that we think could be included in the rule. First, the rebuttable presumption. In a prior version of the commission's rules, the October 14th, 2021 version, the commission proposed in Rule 38.5.82123 that to encourage utilities to use a competitive solicitation process, there would be a rebuttable presumption for the acquisition of any large resource that acquiring a resource not in a competitive solicitation process is not in the public interest. I did not see similar language to that in the most recent version of the rules, and I would recommend that the commission re-explore that to really make sure the intent of HB 597 is fully in the rules and that there are adequate ratepayer protections in there. Next, rules about advisory committee. I noted on the new rule 4.1 states that the utility must designate and engage with an advisory committee on a regular basis. We think advisory committee and getting as much stakeholder input as possible into the resource planning process is vital to a successful resource planning process. And we would like to see the language be tightened up a little bit, change the word on a regular basis to something more prescriptive on how often meetings should be held. That way, fend off against any future disputes over interpretations about whether a utility met with their advisory committee on a regular basis or not. We also noticed in Rule 4, Section 5, there's a time period for the utility to submit a draft resource plan and submit comments. Again, often resource planning processes are highly technical, robust data sets, a lot of modeling involved. We would like to see more time in the draft and the time that a draft resource plan is submitted, and more time to allow stakeholders to review and analyze and submit comments. So again, we think a little more time in that process would be an improvement to the rules, and we will submit comments suggesting specific rule changes to that point. Finally, we've submitted comments before, and I believe other parties have in this proceeding, touching on discovery and increased transparency during the resource planning process. We proposed in prior comments to have additional opportunities for stakeholders and interested parties to submit discovery requests to third-party administrators on their final reports for independent monitors as they also submit reports in the process. We haven't seen anything relating to discovery in the latest set of rules, so that's something that we would again encourage an opportunity for interested parties to ask questions of reports that is submitted to the commission in the resource planning process. Just again, more transparency, more opportunity for stakeholders to participate in the process and provide feedback. So we thank you for the opportunity to be here today and provide comments. And we're interested in the comments that have been submitted thus far and comments that I'm sure to come. And we will provide more in written comments next week. So thank you.
Thank you.
Mr.
Next opponent, please.
Mr. Chairman, I think for the record, this witness said that he was a proponent, but was going to request additional changes. Record should note proponent, not opponent.
You were an opponent to this, weren't you?
Yes, so I'm speaking as an opponent to the rules. I think what I was trying to say is we think the rules as written have a lot of great aspects to them, but we do think there's things we would change. So We're not a proponent of the entire set of rules.
Thank you.
Sorry for the confusion.
Chairman, President Brown, Commissioners, thanks for hosting this public hearing. My name is Spencer Gray. I'm the Executive Director. Is the mic on?
Is the blue light illuminated?
Yes.
Okay, thank
Great,
you.
Thank you. Spencer Gray, I'm the Executive Director of the Northwest and Intermountain Power Producers Coalition, or NIPSI. We're a regional trade association made up of members in the 4 Northwestern states, Montana, Idaho, Oregon, and Washington. We represent IPPs. We're a technology neutral group. We have owners of natural gas generation, renewables, storage, you name it, across the Northwestern states. I'm here to testify in support of strengthening the draft rule. I bring the perspective of, again, a technology neutral set of generation developers and owners active across the country in delivering power supply to utilities and directly to consumers. I want to emphasize that the companies that I represent do large scale production of energy development in Montana in the hundreds of scales of megawatts. NIPSI has not conducted PURPA work in Montana. And so the perspective I'm bringing is really for a wide set of IPPs who would like to bid into procurements for utilities in Montana. One of the hallmarks of a regulatory policy in the states that we're active in that encourages market competition and harnesses that competition for the benefit of consumers is a strong set of procurement rules for the utilities. In this respect, the draft rules in the current revision that's before the commission are too weak in our view. In our view, they would represent arguably the weakest procurement rules in the region. We've examined Oregon, Washington, Idaho, Montana, Utah. The proposed rules in front of the commission would put Montana behind the curve in terms of accessing the most cost-effective, competitive supply of power in the region. And I'd like to remind the commission, we have a regional electricity grid. The transmission lines cross all state boundaries. When developers look at a place to bid in their proposed new plants or existing plants to sell to utilities, they have a choice of where to do that. And our greatest fear as a coalition is that if the commission moves forward in adopting the proposed rules, Montana will not know about the bids that it's missing out on because IPPs will simply not bid into a process that they don't have faith in. I want to underscore that point. NIPSI certainly doesn't begrudge investor-owned utilities earning a rate of return on their rate-based assets. They have a fiduciary responsibility to their shareholders, just as many of the member companies that NIPSI represents have. But those proposed utility-owned projects should be competing on a fair basis with third-party independently owned projects. And that is where a competitive procurement rule really has a place. In our view, it's the commission's role to make sure that there's a level playing field. So whether it's a utility-owned resource or a third-party resource, they're competing with each other on a level playing field. Unfortunately, the proposed rules represent a step backward from the previous draft rules. NIPSI supplied detailed recommendations and now our third round of testimony. We sent them in last week to make sure they were available ahead of this hearing. They provide some specific recommendations to strengthen the proposed rules in a way that would move Montana up to be more on par with those neighboring states who are competing for the same resources that would serve Montana consumers. And I'll just highlight a few of those high-level recommendations. NIPSI would recommend restoring the rebuttable presumption that a competitive RFP should be run. There may be exceptions under Montana law, but in most cases, a competitive RFP should be the norm, not the exception for procuring power in Montana. Number two, in our experience, states that have robust RFP rules have an active commission that looks at the draft RFP from the utility and provides some level of feedback to make sure that before the RFPs actually run, that is actually a competitive process. So the actual design of the RFP in any given RFP should be subject to somewhat more scrutiny by the commission in advance rather than solely after the fact. And I would extend that point to the role of some kind of third-party administrator or independent evaluator. A previous witness here testified to the idea that the third-party administrator could be thought of as just a caregiver, a partner to the utility in seeing through the RFP. Perhaps that's the role of the third-party administrator, but either the third-party administrator or the commission should be in the role to provide some real scrutiny as to whether a proposed RFP will in fact be competitive or not. Number 3, in our experience, the proposed 45-day timeline for public comment on draft RFPs would be by far the shortest in the region. We've suggested instead a 70-day timeline to at least give stakeholders enough time to go through the details of what are the actual rules being proposed for this RFP, how will the utility score bids into the RFP. 70 days would still be shorter than almost all other states in the region, but would give commenters and stakeholders more time to review the RFP. Finally, on the point of transparency, and the large customer group testified to this as well, having some form of discovery rights or the opportunity to ask a utility questions in a public setting before the commission about how the RFP is drafted is very important. Coupled with that, a kind of benchmark that we've seen in other states for the transparency of an adequately transparent RFP is whether a bidder can self-score. And so if it's a black box exercise, you send in your bid, the utility scores it however they score internally, and you don't have a sense in advance or after the fact how you could have made yourself competitive in drafting your project and figuring out transmission rights and setting a price. It's very difficult to know if it's really a competitive process. And so to the extent that the actual bid score sheet for RFPs is known in advance, is quantitative, that really assists the market in choosing whether to participate in a given state's RFPs. That summarizes my written testimony that we've already supplied from NIPSI. And again, I urge the commission to consider strengthening this proposed rule. Thank you.
Thank you. Next opponent, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Daniel Zolnikov, the original sponsor of House Bill 597. I'm going to be a little bit more blunt than the previous speakers. I'm going to start out by being clear. I am not in support of the current rules proposed by the PSC. I waited very patiently during a 2-year informal rulemaking process to create or watch and observe a solid set of rules get created that can implement House Bill 597 thoughtfully and tactfully. The goal is to set up a very clear process for integrated resource planning and a fair, functional, competitive solicitation process. I generally supported the rules that were issued last October, but the last set of rules proposed were a complete 180 that changed the function of the rules from a clear process to open-ended, permissive language that deferred to utilities' interests instead of putting the PSC back in the driver's seat with the authority to properly regulate and ensure the best outcome for the utility, the ratepayers, and all of Montana. After more than 3 years since House Bill 597 was passed, the commission rules upended what was a good working draft of proposed rules and instead issued the current proposed rules that effectively serve to nullify the intent of House Bill 597. So the role of the PSC is to ensure or is to use the power granted by the legislature to enact a functioning regulatory process. It is regulatory. It does have oversight. And the rulemaking process during that last 2 years was going well, but somehow in the 12th hour, the final version of the language of the rules came out and they were significantly changed in a way that simply gut not just the rules, but the legislation. For example, the word shall was changed to should dozens of times. Rules that are permissive aren't rules. They are cop-outs. It is comparable to telling your kids they should clean their room versus they shall clean their room. The words matter. I know the amount of lobbying that utilities undertook on the PSC staff over the last year of these rules, and I could only surmise from the process that a representative of one of the Montana's utilities literally rewrote these new rules for the utilities. During the public roundtable, a staff member of the PSC publicly told the stakeholders that the utility is lobbying the PSC and that the other stakeholders needed to do the same. They told us that in public. In what sane world are people expected to lobby the staff to implement rules? The law and the public comment is supposed to be the basis of the rules, not backroom conversations. Just a few minutes ago, it was mentioned that how happy the representatives of the utility had with the many meetings between the stakeholders, PSC, and utilities. There was one meeting. There was only one meeting. There weren't many meetings, and I was never invited to any of those other meetings with the stakeholders and the utility and the PSC. There was one meeting. I was here for it. So all those other meetings, what was being said? How did that happen? Is that how rules are supposed to be created? The law and public comment, again, was supposed to be the basis of the rules. I also know that the utilities threatened to litigate if the rules did not come out in their favor. But let me give you some history. The original laws that I intended to clean up with House Bill 597, before House Bill 597, were originally written by and lobbied by the utilities after deregulation occurred. So this would be re-regulation in the early 2000s. They were rewritten. And a little bit more history was that the committees in the legislature were typically set up by utility representation. I know because I was there. The laws were originally set up by the utilities after deregulation occurred. The laws created a dysfunctional, murky regulatory environment where the PSC couldn't really do their job. They couldn't maintain oversight. They couldn't properly regulate as the rule requires. And when working to pass House Bill 597, neither utility supported the law. They actually fought tooth and nail to prevent the laws from passing the legislature and then lobbied the governor's office to prevent it from becoming law after it passed the legislature. There's your history. So blows my mind of that the fact that the people only proponents for these rules were the utilities in which they fought so hard for the changes I was working to implement. You could also guess my dismay when I saw the written comments from utilities saying that these rules were not the legislative intent. Interesting, because again, I was the person pushing the legislation. I think I'd have a stronger opinion of what was legislative intent. And I can quote some of the comments, but I will leave that for another time. That said what the intent of the legislature really was. The original rules were intended to change the implementation of the new laws. This is common sense. The adjustments to the laws require adjustments to the rules. So when we're talking about rules written in the 80s and the 90s, that was another time. And when you patch up rules over time, they start to lose weight. So yes, I was also in support of rewriting the rules and looking at a comprehensive approach. The bill was comprehensive, the rules are comprehensive, and the approach was comprehensive. So going back and adjusting what was, it's just more patchwork. And again, not very effective if you have permissive language in that patchwork. I will tell you what my intent was not. For the utility to rewrite the rules and the PSC to become a captive entity that is left unable to do its job. These rules literally leave the process even worse than before the passage of the legislation. House Bill 597 sought to fundamentally change the status quo of the build bias or the utility build bias so that Montana ratepayers receive the benefit of transparent planning process and a fair and truly competitive energy market with the result of procuring the most affordable energy resources that fit the need of the region, not the most profitable resource that benefits utilities' financial sheets on the back of captive Montana customers who ultimately pay the price through their energy bills. The critical aspect of achieving that goal is the requirement that rates be efficient and procurement of resources through competitive solicitation processes be encouraged. The commission has an obligation to create rules that fulfill the directives of the bill. And simply put, these proposed rules are currently written in a way that they fall short. So I am asking you today, please correct these rules and implement rules similar to the proposed rules from October 2021, so we can finally create a mature regulatory climate regarding the PSC and Montana's utilities. And one last final comment on the third-party administrator that oversees the competitive solicitation that was mentioned. They're not just a partner. Say you all bid in to a project or to bid a project, and I did too, and then I chose the entity that would select the winner. Do you think I would select the entity that would maybe have a bias towards me? Or do you think I would choose one that would choose you and make it so my resource doesn't get selected? It just seems like the fox is guarding the hen house, and that is a major concern. So thank you again for taking the time to listen. And I will, of course, be submitting some pretty thorough comments on red line of what I'd like to see change as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Next opponent, please. We have another opponent in the room. With that, we'll go to opponents online. Who do we have first? Mr. Stanger, can you hear us? Mr. Stanger, can you hear us?
Yes. Can you hear me now?
Yes, please state your name and address for the record and tell us why you're an opponent.
Thank you. My name is Irian Sanger, and I'm here today representing the Northwest Intermountain Power Producers Coalition, along with Mr. Gray, who just spoke. My address is 1041 Southeast Hawthorne Boulevard, Portland, Oregon, 97215. NIPSI appreciates the work that staff.
Mr. Stanger, can you get closer to the microphone or raise your volume so we can hear you a little better?
Yes. Is this better? Does this help?
Again?
Yeah. Do you want me to repeat my address again?
We need that repeated. No,
Okay.
we're okay. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. My name is Irian Sanger, and my address is Sanger Law, 1041 Southeast Hawthorne Boulevard, Portland, Oregon, 97215. I'm sorry, 97214. NIPSI appreciates the work that staff and other stakeholders have put into this proceeding to implement competitive resource solicitation rules. But as Mr. Gray mentioned, we recommend that the commission make significant revisions to the proposed rules. The proposed rules are likely to harm ratepayers by making Montana a unique state that is unable to fully benefit from the savings to ratepayers that result from access to competitive markets in the region. My oral comments are going to focus on why stronger rules are needed, and then identify at a high level the main recommendations that NIPSI has proposed to improve the competitive solicitation process. This includes the commission providing clear direction to the utilities on the RFP design, allowing bidders to better understand what resources the utilities actually want to acquire, ensuring that the commission has a role to play in approving or at least providing guidance regarding the final RFP that is issued to the market, and facilitating meaningful stakeholder engagement in the design of the RFP. These are best practices that other states with robust competitive bidding rules have adopted and are saving ratepayers millions of dollars. Competitive solicitation rules are required because utilities in vertically integrated markets have a bias to own capital-intensive electric generation resources. This is because of under the current regulatory construct, utilities earn returns on investing and owning generation resources while they only obtain cost recovery, but no profit on purchasing electricity from the market. In both theory and in practical reality, monopoly utilities generally build and own more expensive, riskier, and less reliable generation resources than third parties who are exposed to the forces of competition. The wholesale power markets allow private, independent power producers to put their own capital at risk. This competition drives down the cost of and improves the reliability and quality of electric generation and reduces the risk for both utilities and their end-use consumers. The Commission has two main tools to ensure that monopoly utilities make the best choice to acquire the least cost and least risk resources for ratepayers. The primary tool that Montana has is an after-the-fact prudence review when the utility seeks to include the capital costs of the new generation resource in rates. However, traditionally, commissions are reluctant to impose significant penalties or rate disallowances on utilities, even when the utilities make imprudent or negligent business decisions. In addition, utilities may perceive the risk of or an actual cost disallowance as a small price to pay to be able to include the costs of an owned resource in rates. Competitive solicitation rules, therefore, are a powerful supplement, not a replacement of the traditional prudence review. This protects ratepayers by reducing the chances that the utilities make a harmful decision in the first place. First, as Mr. Gray discussed, independent power producers are more likely to invest their time and resources into preparing bids when they believe that the RFP will be fair and transparent. If Montana is seen as having a competitive solicitation process that allows the utility to pre-select utility-owned resources, then fewer companies will submit bids. This means that it's going to be impossible for the Commission to even know what options the utility could have acquired, and it'll be far more difficult to conduct a prudence review. Second, without strong rules, then the utility will be able to design the RFP to ensure that a utility-owned resource will win that RFP, even if independent power producers have submitted bids that are lower cost, more reliable, and less risky. Therefore, to address these problems, NPSC recommends a number of high-level revisions that will improve the Commission's RFP process. But I want to reiterate that even with these changes, the Montana process will be the least robust of those states that have rigorous competitive bidding rules. First, the Commission should adopt rules that provide clear direction on how the utility should design an RFP. We know the Commission is going to decide that it will not mandate that a utility must conduct an RFP to acquire resources. Since this is not a mandatory process, then the Commission has wide latitude to impose strict requirements for the utilities to comply with when they decide to conduct an RFP under the rules. The Commission should retain the existing language and the current rules that requires utilities to use, quote, proven, cost-effective computer modeling and rigorous analysis, end quote, when developing bid criteria and ranking methodologies. The Commission should significantly expand the description of the required bidding criteria. We provided language that's used in Utah, in Idaho, in Oregon that provide clear and specific direction to the utility and how to design a fair and competitive RFP. The Commission should strengthen the language on the ability for bidders to self-score, as Mr. Gray explained. Self-scoring is a critically important idea that the bidder can review the RFP and know how its particular bid will be scored by the utility. This allows the bidder to know what the utility really wants, and then they can design their bid to provide the utility with the energy, the capacity, the risk features, reliability, cost, location, and all sorts of other attributes that the utility says that it wants and needs to provide service to customers. Without self-scoring, then the bidders are just guessing in the dark and their bids will not match with the utility claims that it wants. And the practical result will be utility-owned resource options, quote unquote, win the RFP because bidders were never able to give the utility what it claims it wants. The next major area that we recommend is that the utility retain the language in the earlier draft rules that there be a rebuttable presumption that certain resource procurements are not in the public interest if they're not selected through an RFP. And also retain the clear statement that the commission will review proposed RFPs for compliance with the adopted rules. Next, the commission should actively oversee the RFP process and provide timely guidance and enable the utilities to correct course if they need to. The RFP process in other states, regardless of what the commission does here, will be more robust, and they include generally clear requirements that the utility obtain approval from the commission before the RFP goes to the market. This can be a robust process. However, the commission can still provide guidance and have a meaningful and robust process that does not set precedent, does not limit your options in a future rate-making proceeding, but allows the commission to provide a strong indication to the utility that they should change their RFP or risk a prudence disallowance in a rate case. The most important thing here for an effective RFP process is that the commission consider the stakeholder concerns and then issue guidance as early as possible. This is going to allow the utility to make changes, and if the utility doesn't make those changes, then the commission is going to have information to be able to conduct an adequate future prudence review. Next, the commission should ensure that stakeholders have a meaningful opportunity to review and comment on the RFP. This means that stakeholders can gain significant access to information, they can ask questions, and they have time to review and comment on the RFP. As Mr. Gray explained, that a 45-day process is simply not enough time to have a meaningful review. NIPSEA's 70-day review process would be the shortest process in states with robust competitive bidding rules, including Utah, Idaho, Oregon, and Washington, which generally have a 3 to 8 month process. We are not proposing that long of a process. We're only proposing a 70-day review process. And in other states, stakeholders have the right to ask the utility questions and to request information to analyze the RFPs. This allows you to understand the inputs, the assumptions, how the RFP is actually going to be run. It allows you to ask questions to determine what you actually should bid. What does the utility want? And in addition, utilities typically have websites that allow stakeholders to anonymously ask questions. And in other states, the utilities provide detailed and voluminous answers to the questions that are asked. Finally, I want to respond to the comment that the utility should be allowed to select the independent administrator, the third-party administrator, and the comment that you need to be hand in hand. We disagree 180 degrees here. The most important thing in selecting somebody is that they be independent of the utility, that they understand that their primary role is to ensure that the RFP is well run, not to ensure that the utility wins its own RFP. We have seen this as a problem in many, many states where the utility exercises its unfettered discretion and you've got an entity involved that is not looking out for ratepayer interests. They're looking out for the utility's interests. In conclusion, we believe the commission has a once-in-a-generation opportunity to adopt clear and simple rules that will save ratepayers millions of dollars when the utilities are going out to acquire significant new resources to meet their future load. Without changes, NIPSI fears that Montana will be the only state in the Intermountain and Pacific Northwest that has these sorts of rules in which there is not a robust process to ensure that the benefits of the competitive wholesale market are realized. These rules, we believe, will result in higher costs, higher risk, and lower reliability of the electric generation used to serve ratepayers. Thank you very much. We submitted our earlier comments for you to review in advance of the hearing. We may submit additional comments. We appreciate this opportunity to participate in the process. Thank you.
Thank you. Next opponent, please.
Hello?
Mary, can you hear me?
Yes, can you hear me?
I hear you fine. State your name, address, and your testimony. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. My name is Mary Catherine Dunphy, MaryCatherine, Dunphy, D-U-N is in Nancy, P is in Paul, H-Y. My address is P.O. Box 292, Miles City, Montana, 59301. So, good afternoon, Commissioner Pinocci and other commissioners. For starters, I agree with everything opponents Mr. Zolnikoff and Mr. Sanger have just spoken about and will add. I am opposed to the proposed new rule for several reasons, which have to do with maintaining a clean and healthful environment for the people of Montana as guaranteed in the Montana Constitution, as well as for reasons pertaining to the due process of law and due diligence. Although the new rules are supposed to improve the energy planning process, the way they are written would allow Northwest Energy's modeling software to predetermine the energy sources it prefers, dirty, expensive methane gas plants. In addition, the proposed rule limits the input of public interest groups that are crucial sources of expertise necessary to evaluate electricity generating systems and their effect on Montana citizens. Unfortunately, this new rule will only help Northwest Energy stick Montana ratepayers with dirty, unhealthy, environmentally destructive, and expensive electricity when there are so many cleaner, healthier, cheaper, and reliable alternatives. It's interesting to note that Northwest Energy promotes clean energy on their website, noting that 59% of their electricity generation in Montana comes from carbon-free sources. Additionally, their publication Net Zero by 2050 is their blueprint to reduce their carbon net emissions to zero by 2050. However, I say, why should Northwest Energy wait until 2050 to get to net zero? There are entire countries that have 100% reliable renewable energy right now: Paraguay, Albania, the Congo, and Iceland. In 2021, Warren Buffett's Mid-American Energy generated 88.5% of electricity for its Iowa customers from renewable sources. Green Mountain Power in Vermont is committed to producing 100% renewable electricity by 2030. Why does Northwest Energy want to wait 28 more years to do what others are doing today or in the very near future? Instead, with your blessings, Northwest Energy is building a 175 megawatt methane gas power plant in Laurel, Montana, that is estimated to emit 706 tons of carbon each year for the life of the power plant, for a total of 33 more years. And Northwest Energy has plans for more. That's a really strange way to get to net zero by 2050. It's like taking a huge detour along the way to one's destination. Another way to think about it is this: it's like a drug addict who admits to needing them to make a big change to protect his or her life, but decides to go on a big, long binge before getting totally clean. We are setting record high temperatures this summer here in Montana. It's starting to feel like we live in Arizona instead of Montana, and it's only going to get worse, according to the climate scientists. On my to-do list this week, I also plan to talk to local emergency coordinators here in Miles City about establishing an emergency cooling center for elderly and low-income folks who either do not have an air conditioner or cannot afford the expense of running an air conditioner 24/7 in order to avoid a heat stroke. 2 years ago, I suggested this and they didn't listen to me. We've had 106 degrees a couple days here in Miles City. Maybe they will now. Why wait until 2050 to get to net zero when climate scientists are warning us of the adverse and dire effects of unmitigated climate change? The science is unequivocal. Climate change endangers the well-being of people and the planet. Delayed action triggering impacts of climate change so catastrophic our world will become unrecognizable. The next few years offer a narrow window to realize a sustainable, livable future for all. Changing course will require immediate, ambitious, and concerted efforts to slash emissions. There are many utility-scale electricity projects combining wind, solar, and batteries under construction in California, Oregon, Oklahoma, and elsewhere. These triple hybrid projects produce clean, sustainable, reliable, affordable, and dispatchable electricity. So excess electricity generated at times of peak generation when the sun is shining and the wind is blowing can be stored in big batteries and used whenever needed. Check out what PG&E is doing with renewables and Elon Musk Tesla batteries in California. I'll include a link in my written testimony. Idaho Power recently signed a contract for 120 megawatts of solar power for less than 2.2 cents per kilowatt hour, one of the lowest solar prices in the country. I also respectfully assert that enacting this new rule is a protectionist move, protecting the interests of Northwest Energy and its investors, not the Montana ratepayers, businesses, and taxpayers. Please also consider the other multi-million-dollar industries in Montana that are being adversely affected by CO2-driven climate change. Farmers Union economists have forecast the loss of 36,000 jobs in Montana's farms, ranches, tourism, sport fishing, and ski industries as carbon dioxide-driven climate warming continues to heat and dry and/or heat and flood Montana. Early this summer, we all saw the severe damage caused by an extreme weather event in Yellowstone Park. It was recently reported that repairing Yellowstone Park's flood damage could cost more than $1 billion. Damage to roads and bridges in Montana will cost another $29 million to repair. Then there are the devastating economic losses for Gardner and Red Lodge, which saw their summer tourism economy swept away in the flood. You all on the PSC have a legal obligation to consider these people and businesses when making your decisions about Northwest Energy's electricity generating plans and whether their dirty electricity generating plans will contribute to the climate emergency. So in closing, I urge you to reconsider this proposed rule and reject it as being unreasonable, unfair, and in violation of Montana's Constitution and due process law. And listen to the people who have just spoken as the opponents who are far better versed in this subject than I am. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Next opponent, please.
Hi, can you hear me?
Hello.
Hi.
Steve, we hear you fine. State your name, address, and your testimony, please.
My name is Steve Crum. I live in Laurel, Montana, 249 24th Avenue West. And I do oppose this weaker set of proposed rule changes. I am also a part of the Thiel Road Coalition that is currently opposing the plant Northwest is currently constructing in Laurel, Montana. I've never done anything like this other than locally, so thank you for allowing us to do this. I feel that one of the things that we've seen along the way is that the ratepayers were completely left out, and we ended up with something we did not want going into Laurel. I do ask that you go slow, you be transparent, and that's what all these opponents are asking you to do. No more backroom meetings, because we feel that was a big part of what happened here in Laurel area. When you speak to some of the elected officials, that there's been meetings going on for years and we haven't heard anything about it. Make sure that what you approve is as good as it can be, because it is important for something that's going to last 30 years, be right for the area, right for the ratepayers, right for the environment. And that's not what we have going on here in Laurel. We count on the PSC, to look out for our well-being. And I don't feel this happened in Laurel. I believe Laurel is headed towards a nightmare of noise and air pollution. We are the result of weaker rules, not stronger rules, stronger, fair regulations. Please don't let this happen again in our state. As we do not agree to having these weaker rules, because that is what we're fighting now, is this stuff coming in and just bulldozing us over with hardly any resources to stop it. Laurel location should be a good place for green energy, a good spot for solar panels, a good spot for batteries, not the place for a noisy, air polluting plant that sits right within less than a half mile of residential areas, a half mile from the city of Laurel. This is not where this plant should be. So please do not allow for these weaker rules. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, sir. Next opponent, please. We will be hearing from some testimony, witnesses that are going to be informational at the end. We'll start with the room and then online.
Good morning, Chairman or good afternoon, Chairman Pinocci, Commissioners. My name is Robin Arnold. I'm with Renewable Northwest. My address is 22 Lupin Lane, Clancy, Montana, 59634. And I apologize for not being there this afternoon. I was traveling for work last week and caught a cold, so I decided to keep my germs to myself today. I'll keep my comments brief. We are planning on submitting more detailed written comments, but I would like to reiterate that the Commission does not need to stay strictly bound to House Bill 597. It has broad rulemaking discretion, and it has been a long time since these rules were last updated. A lot has changed in the planning process since the 90s, and that is why staff initially put a lot of time and effort into drafting some robust rules that overhauled the entire rulemaking process. I would note that the intent was to have a robust stakeholder discussion on those initial rules as well. That is why the Commission issued them as a request for comments instead of directly filing them with the Secretary of State when they were first written. So stakeholders have had several opportunities to comment on these rules. As far as this current version goes, it's only a marginal improvement to the current planning practices at the Commission. Is not nearly as robust as what was initially proposed. There are several ways that they could be improved. For example, in the planning section, there is a lack of teeth and requirements in rules 1 through 4. The rules should also reflect language that include PPAs and market purchases. Well, it's included in the definition of resource. There are also other components of the resource definition that are sometimes called out specifically, whereas PPAs and market purchases never are, so that language should be clear. We think that in new rule 3.1H, it could include tax credits as an element in the resource description. And in new rule 4.1, there should be limitations on when ETAC can close meetings. As has been pointed out, the comment period, once the draft rule is issued for comment before the final rule is issued, is very short. Therefore, the most chance that stakeholders have for commenting and interaction and influence on the planning process is during the ETAC meetings, and they should be open to the public as much as possible, unless there is financial or sensitive information being discussed. As far as competitive solicitations, again, there should be a clear role of the PSC and a clear role for the third-party administrator. There should be clear, stronger stakeholder process language, and there should be clear, stronger language on the resource scoring methodology and on scoring transparency. And finally, we do believe that language around rebuttable presumption should be brought back into the rules. We understand that pre-approval is currently pending before the courts. However, it is very likely that the legislature will pass a law in this next session to bring pre-approval back and apply it to both the utilities. And so we believe that the rules should address the potential of pre-approved resources as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Next opponent, please. Looks like Jim's not on. Maybe we'll go to Jenny next.
Good afternoon, Chairman Pinocci and commissioners. Thanks for the opportunity to speak to these rules today. My name is Jenny Harbine. I'm here today representing Montana Environmental Information Center. My work address is 313 East Main in Bozeman. The rules at issue in this hearing specifically implement HB 597, and my comments will focus on that. But I do want to be clear at the outset, as other commenters have, that the Commission's obligations and rulemaking authority are much broader than that statute. The Commission is charged with ensuring adequate utility service at just and reasonable rates for consumers, and it has an obligation to enact rules that, quote, do all things necessary and convenient in the exercise of its powers. And HB 597 affirmed, but didn't limit the Commission's authority in this area. Former Commissioner Travis Kabula often reminded us that because utilities don't operate in an open marketplace, it's the well-accepted goal of Commission regulation to ensure just and reasonable rates by adopting policies that simulate competition in the free market. In the planning and procurement context, this is done by ensuring that the utility considers the broadest possible range of alternatives and thoroughly evaluates the costs and benefits of each, including where those benefits accrue primarily to customers rather than to the utility. And I do want to repeat at the outset here, Representative Zolnikov's troubling observation that in today's hearing, only utilities, Northwestern and MDU, spoke as proponents of the proposed rules that are before you. This is a signal, I think, that these proposed rules, as opposed to the 2021 draft rules that have been invoked by many of the opponents of the draft rules, go too far to satisfy the regulated parties at the expense of other stakeholders, including consumers. MEIC urges the Commission to make changes to the proposed rules to meet its statutory obligations under HB 597 and the other statutes. On planning, one of the chief purposes of HB 597 was to require more accurate and complete modeling and evaluation of resource alternatives, including a fair consideration of renewable resources and low-cost energy efficiency and demand-side management. Now, agree with Mr. Rivas that the Commission, again, has broad power to craft sensible rules to meet this goal above and beyond what's expressed in HB 597, but the proposed rules don't even meet the bare minimum standards of the new statute. And I just want to provide a few examples. First, in the planning context, The statute says that a plan must contain an evaluation of the full range of cost-effective resources. But the proposed rules set a lower standard and conflict with that statute, requiring just a description rather than an evaluation, a description of a wide range of plausibly cost-effective resources. And we would urge that the rules be clarified to ensure that the legislative intent isn't subverted by giving the utility too much discretion to pick and choose which resources and means to satisfy the utility's resource needs to evaluate. Second, the minimum plan requirements in the proposed rules are insufficiently detailed to ensure that the utility evaluates and discloses essential information to ensure a robust and meaningful process. Now, again, the 2021 draft rules were much better in this regard and should be retained insofar as they provided much greater detail and clarity regarding plan requirements. Also on planning, the utility should provide greater transparency into its resource evaluation by requiring it to produce the modeling input and output files, as well as what Northwestern calls dashboard access to its model, rather than just a narrative description of inputs and assumptions that makes this resource evaluation effectively a black box. And last, on plan development, MEIC urges the Commission to revise the rule to ensure more meaningful and upfront stakeholder engagement, including by providing an opportunity for informal discovery, as happens in many other states, and providing adequate time for public comments. On procurement, I'll note that the key change that HB 597 made to utility resource procurement requirements was to expressly and heavily favor competitive solicitations. The proposed rules fall short of this in several respects. First, as Representative Zolnikov noted, missing from the rules is mandatory language requiring competitive solicitation for pre-approval resources. And this is essential to meet the statutory requirements if and when pre-approval is revived. And second, the proposed rules are insufficient even in their encouragement of competitive solicitation for non-pre-approval resources. So the statute is clear that competitive solicitations are favored, and it's the Commission's obligation to create necessary incentives to foster greater reliance on competitive solicitations by utilities. But it's not enough to just say that the Commission is encouraging competitive solicitations. You need to actually build those incentives into the rule. And again, the 2021 draft rules did a much better job at meeting this legislative intent. Numerous commenters mentioned the rebuttable presumption that were present in that prior version of the rules, and MEIC similarly supports reincorporating such a presumption, as well as other measures that would create clear incentives for competitive solicitation that's essential to ensure lowest possible cost for Montana customers and to prevent and mitigate utility self-dealing. MEIC will provide more detailed written comments, but I want to close today just by encouraging the Commission to take seriously all of the stakeholder comments you've heard here today and to significantly strengthen the proposed rules, including by reverting to much of the language of your prior draft. Thank you.
Thank you. Did Jim get back online with us? Michelle. All right. Is Brian in?
Wait. Hello. Can you hear me?
Brian, is that you? Lance.
Yes.
I see a Lance.
Brian Meritz.
Oh, Brian. Okay. State your name and address.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes. Brian Meritz. That's spelled M-A-R-O-T-Z. My address is 1752 Stagg Lane, in Kalispell, Montana, 59901. Commissioners, I appreciate this opportunity. I invested over 35 years balancing power generation with natural resources to protect the very ecosystems that sustain us. I'm concerned that Northwest Energy's integrated resource plan, as written, does not do enough to promote clean, renewable energy sources. I recognize that it is difficult to align renewables like wind and solar with the energy load requirements. So I hope that the commission will, I urge you to pursue off-channel pump storage projects like Gordon Butte. Designed correctly, power can be stored to deliver hydropower when the sun sets and when the wind stops. Managed strategically, pump storage can simultaneously improve river flows for fish and recreation. Moving more strongly to green energy will align Montana with national carbon reduction goals set for 2030, as well as the 2050 goal of net zero set by Northwest Energy. The Public Service Commission and the legislature should also help individuals create microgrids so that they can take the heat off of the primary grids when we get into a crunch. Yes, this transition will be expensive. I understand that there's 2.4 billion, that's with a B, set to be expended in the next 5 years. And that's a good start, but we need to be shifting toward green energy, carbon reduction. It's expensive, but failure to act will cost future generations a livable planet. So I thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Any other opponents?
Hello, this is Lance Brady.
Now, Lance, you're an informational witness, is that correct? Yes, can you hear us?
This is Lance Brady. Can you hear me?
I can. Are you an informational witness? An opponent.
Is that better?
Okay, so we're done with our opponents. Okay, Lance, you are an informational witness. State your name, address, and your informational testimony. Thank you. Lance, we're not hearing you. You there?
Hello, this is Lance. Can you hear me?
We hear you now, Lance.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I think the audio is breaking up. If you can hear me, I will submit written comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Lance. Any other informational witnesses?
Hello?
Hello, sir. Can you hear us okay?
Yes. Hi, this
Okay.
is Tyven Bovington with Sacagawea Energy. Hear me?
Can you hear us, sir?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, great.
Go ahead with your informational testimony.
Yes. This is Tyven Bovington at 3212 Hidden Springs Lane, Bozeman, Montana, with Sacagawea Energy. On an information testimony, I would like to just say that the rules in this bill, I don't think they quantify or qualify for every thing that is necessary. There's been a major change at the federal level associated with the active tax advantages and for wind and solar and renewable energy. And there has been an introduction of a methane tax, which is obviously bad for coal, oil, and gas. And I don't think that that has been considered on a federal level, and also Montana as an exporter of energy and how it is currently an exporter of energy, but in the future may not be, because nobody will want our power if we stay in fossil fuels. And the current plans in place, where it empowers the local utilities to quickly act upon their own interests and not, I don't believe, is taken into account the full cost of staying in stranded assets, replacing it with more stranded assets. So if it does economically make sense, I would support that, but I believe it does not. So from an information standpoint, I would appreciate that legislature and the Public Service Commission adopt a policy where it takes into account the present and the future of gas prices, the actual fuel, and also the federal level and the neighboring states' taxes on fossil fuel emissions and greenhouse gas emissions.
Is that the end of your testimony, sir?
Yeah, that's the end of my testimony, and I'm also submitting a written testimony.
Thank you. Are there any other informational witnesses? Do we have an informational witness in the room? Any more online? Did Jim circle back on his testimony as an opponent? Okay. Yeah, I encourage everyone to submit something in writing for today's testimony. That'd be great, including Jim. The commission maintains a list of interested persons and the subjects in which each person on the list is interested. Within 3 days of the rulemaking notice being published, all interested persons are notified about the rulemaking activity. If anyone here would like to be placed on the interested persons list, please use the meeting sign-in sheet to indicate your wish to be included as an interested person. I will now close the rulemaking public hearing. Pursuant to Montana Code annotated 2-3-103, every commission meeting must include an opportunity for the public comment on any public matter that is not on the agenda, but is within the commission's jurisdiction. Is there any public comment on matters on today's agenda, but not on today's agenda, but within the commission's jurisdiction? Seeing none, this meeting's adjourned. How you been?